Welcome to Money DJ. Today we're going to talk about the frontier market bonds, why they are so special, and why so many investors are eager to find out. We're so honored today to invite Mr. Donald Amstad to the show and share with us his expertise in this topic. Donna is from the ASI Aberdeen Standard Investments. He is the head of investments specialist Asia Pacific. Hi Donna, welcome to the show. And do you want to say hi to Taiwan?
Thank you very much. Dage ho.
So our first question is, can you give us an overall introduction to the frontier markets? Who are the major bond issuers in these markets? Please elaborate a little bit more because this is the first of its kind bond fund ever launched in Taiwan.
Well, thank you, Nana. It's a great pleasure to be here as Aberdeen Standard Investments launches the first ever frontier bond market fund on the island of Taiwan. So, what are the frontier countries? These are typically the countries that are more difficult to find on the map. I'm sure most of you watching this video could find Brazil or Russia or Turkey or South Africa or Mexico. You might have a little bit more trouble trying to find a Rwanda or Honduras or Georgia. So these are the smaller countries that make up part of the emerging market world. Now, frontier bonds can include hard currency bonds issued in US dollars. It can also include local currency bonds. And it includes bonds that are issued by sovereigns and indeed bonds that are issued by companies.
Great. And the second question is, what are the key differences between frontier market bond fund and the common emerging market bond fund?
The key difference between the frontier markets and the more traditional emerging market asset classes is the very low level of foreign ownership. There are many institutional investors who already invest, for example, in Mexico. They already invest in Russia or Brazil. But many of these fund managers, and indeed many of our competitors, and where we find securities that are under-researched by competitors, that's where we find opportunity. And with our intensive research approach, we don't buy all of them. We don't take a passive approach. We take a very active approach. But some of these smaller stories are actually incredibly high quality stories. And of course, you're rewarded with a very high yield. The yield on the fund at the moment is about 9.6%. So it's much higher yielding than other traditional markets in.
Great. Since this is a hard to access market, so what are the key benefits to investors if they got more exposure to this kind of frontier market bond fund?
The key benefit is one of low correlation with US Treasuries. So it means that allocating to frontier bonds is a great diversifier for global fixed income investors. If we go into a risk-off scenario, it does not mean that foreigners are going to be pulling money out of frontier markets the way they might pull money out of more developed emerging markets, which is exactly what's happening at the moment.
Wow, that's exciting for us. So the next question is, with the US hiking interest rates, dollar index is getting stronger, and which may trigger the weakening of the overall emerging market currencies as well as the emerging market risky assets. So is this kind of a rate hike anticipation a negative factor to frontier market bond investments?
That's a great question, Nana. And what I'd like to do is to take you through the recent period of US dollar strength that started a couple of weeks ago. And as indeed you mentioned, Nana, the US dollar index has been rather strong. Now, the US dollar has been strong against both developed country currencies and some emerging market currencies. So, for example, against the euro, the dollar has strengthened by about 5%, against the Mexican peso by 9%, and against the Argentinian peso by about 20%. Now, what about frontier currencies? Well, actually, incredibly, some of the frontier currencies have barely moved against the US dollar in this time period. Let's take, for example, the Ukrainian hryvnia, or the Egyptian pound, or the Ghanaian cedi, or the Nigerian naira. These currencies have only weakened by 1 or 2% against the US dollar. Is that in this time that we've had recently of US dollar strength, some of the frontier currencies have been some of the best performing currencies in the world against the US dollar. And that's because interest rates in these countries typically are very high.
Wow, that's very interesting to know, the low correlation with the US dollar. Great. So the next question is, what's ASI's view of the overall frontier market economies?
The first comment I'd like to make about frontier economies is that we find this part of emerging markets opportunity rich. We are active managers. It doesn't mean that we invest in every single country in the frontier space. But, for example, over 15 of the countries we look at are engaged in IMF reform-led programs. And we invest in 11 of these countries. Let's take a country like Egypt. Egypt, which has just passed another series of reforms this week, is probably the star pupil of the International Monetary Fund at the moment. The Nigerians are making progress. The Ghanaians are making progress. There's progress in Mongolia, there's progress in Sri Lanka, there's progress in Ecuador. So actually the reform stories in many of these countries are very specific to that particular country. The rewards that we can gain as investors are very high because yields are so high. So we find the frontier bond market space opportunity rich and crucially under-researched by many of our competitors. There are very few frontier bond funds out there in the market. So this is a very interesting opportunity for all your viewers here in Taiwan.
Thank you, Donna. We have finished all our questions today, and thank you for coming to Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. 谢谢。
No problem.
投资一定有风险，基金投资有赚有赔，申购前请详阅公开说明书。